Hello, my beautiful, beautiful people. We're gonna get started here in just a second, but Facebook seems to be a little wonky tonight, so I want to make sure that we're hopping on early and making sure all the pieces fit together because it kind of just keeps shutting down on me and I'm not sure exactly if it's working. So it says live. It looks like it's recording my voice. I don't know if it's recording my face, although it should be. So I'm going to wait a couple seconds. If you are getting this notification and you are live, please let me know that it's up and working. And I'm just going to hang out for a second and see. Let me know what you guys are doing today. My mother is coming down, and so we have had a pretty busy today preparing everything for her, and it's going to keep on getting busier. So I'm going to go ahead and try and see what it looks like this way. I'm gonna look on my own phone. So I'm listening to you guys, I'm watching for you guys, but I want to see what's happening here. We're gonna get started here in just I'm just gonna hang out for a second and see. Let me know what you guys are doing today. Okay. Looks like it's working. Looks like it's working. So we're going to go ahead and get started and just go with, I don't know what is happening with Facebook right now. Hopefully this saves. Hopefully you guys are able to watch this, but I'm going to jump right into it and get going. So today we are talking about embracing your shadow, and this is probably totally one of my favorite topics. Now, what we've gone over so far in this Rise Up and our Mental Wealth Consciousness chats is really those introductory steps that we should take to combine the spirit with the psyche to create the evolution that we desire. And we're kind of moving on from that here and looking at what comes next. Like when we are doing those steps, when we are taking the time and we've figured out our philosophy for life and we're in the zone and we're embracing and we're healing and we're beginning to enjoy life, exactly what comes next for us. And so one of the things that absolutely changed my life and allowed me to really lift up was learning how to embrace my shadow. And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what shadow work is out there. And there's a lot of different misconceptions, period, about what your shadow is or even what this looks like. And by no means, way, shape, or form am I saying that my way or my perception is the end-all, be-all. It is simply my perception. It is simply the way that I've experienced it so far, and it's the really good shit that I have learned in the past that I'm relearning now, and some new shit that has really began to transform my life and become such a fun, pleasurable time for me. So let's just go right into it and talk about the word shadow itself and exactly what it is. And so I think there's a lot of different versions of what shadow means. I think a lot of us identify it as, this really swampy, yucky part of ourselves that is almost weak and fearful. We identify with it as our lesser version of who we are, or that lower level person inside of us. A lot of times we look at the shadow as a scary version of us. It's the interests within us that we're a little too scared to lean into because they're a little too dark, or they're the corners of our minds that, again, that lower level person, but a person inside of us that we don't want to be, we don't want to reach towards, we don't want to embody or feel because we don't know what path that'll take us down. And so we have that swampy energy around the word or meaning of shadow, which is, that less than or weaker energy. And then we have that almost opposite energy because it's scary. And because it's scary, and because we're afraid of it, it also includes its power. So the opposite of the weakness that we see. I think a lot of us that have done a lot of work and have been in tune to ourselves and have begun to learn about it or create topics of such on the shadow have that recognition of the other version of the shadow, which is the really powerful, true, and bold version of it that allows us to kind of lean into the dark a bit, but really use our darkness to embrace a really powerful part of ourselves that we wouldn't be able to consciously and intentionally create if it wasn't for the shadow work that we've done. And then I think there's that more psychological version of shadow work, which is, your unconscious thought, your subconscious thought, your non-conscious being, those core synapses that you're not necessarily aware of, that you're not in tune to, so on and so forth. And so when it comes to shadow or shadow work or your shadow, I think there's a lot of many different identifiers, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying any of these are wrong. I do 100% believe that whether we're looking at our shadow as swampy, scary, powerful, or just our unconscious being, all of these elements are very true to them. So we're going to dig through that a little bit. Number one, our swampy shadow, and why our shadow resembles a weaker state of mind, a less than person within ourselves. Now, the reason that I believe that there is some serious truth behind this idea that the shadow is swampy is because it is hidden. And when something is hidden, when something is buried, when something is deeper down, it's not something that comes to surface and creates like strength within us. And so if we're looking at our shadow as swampy, I do believe that to be very true, because it's these little pieces of us that are hidden down below, that are weak, that we are not honing in and fine-tuning, that we are not strengthening, that we are not spending the time engaging with. And so there is a part of our shadow, or part of shadow work, where we are identifying with this real swampy energy. Now we're going to go side by side with the swampy and the unconscious. So here's the other side of that. Because your shadow is this blocked, is this not touched, is this forbidden thing, a lot of it does rest on a lot of unconscious or non-conscious triggers behind us all. And so although our unconscious or subconscious behaviors are actually very, very powerful, the energy behind these subconscious triggers is usually very negative. We move forward with trying to build a business and trying to become these powerful women or these powerful leaders, but we can't because we have all of those subconscious limitations that aren't allowing us to move ahead. And being that they're subconscious limitations, they do have that very swampy and negative energy of lack. So in both senses, our shadow work or our shadow itself can be this very unconscious or subconscious negative swampy energy for us. Now in the exact opposite notion, you have this fear factor and this power factor within your shadow. So if you're someone like me who was raised very religiously and very spiritually, that we are naturally taught, naturally coerced into this aspect that there's hidden pieces of ourselves that we shouldn't explore, that there are very sinful natures to the human being, and that to dive into that sinful aspect of us is to move away from our true calling, to move away from our true ability, capability, to our true life. And so there's naturally, and I truly believe, whether you were raised religiously or not, that this energy is here regardless, that there's this scary idea beneath our shadow that pushes us away from it because of the fear, because we're scared to lean in, we're scared to explore, because we don't know what our fate holds if we do so, and we don't truly know what we're actually capable of. So to lean into that shadow work could mean death and destruction for us, both on the world and to ourselves personally.
along with like the physical sphere of the shadow, I think there's a real true reason to have the fear of yourself here. Because when we're dealing with trauma and pain and lifestyles that have led us to where we're called to a higher sense of consciousness, there's a lot of shit in our shadow that can be very damaging to us if not dealt with properly. And then here's the other idea behind the scary is that we just hear that it's scary. We hear that shadow work is hard, that it's the unfun work, that it's the work that is brutal and painful, and it's the work that has to be done eventually, but that it's not fun work. And so I think there's good reason for us to identify with our shadow as a scary source or a source of pain or fear. Now, the last thing here, as far as our identifiers, is the shadow that's powerful. Perhaps you're like me, who you're really, really intrigued by the shadow, by the unconscious, by the limitations, by the dark, by the energy, by something that isn't traditionally accepted in society. And if you're like that, then you already see the power a little bit in the shadow. You already are attracted to and in enjoyment of your shadow in some way, shape, or form. And you see that although it does have massive consequences, it also has massive power here. And so some of us are unlike that, but in the exact same notion of it being powerful, if you've been on this journey of self-development for any length of time, you've seen women all around you, men all around you, leaders all around you, role models all around you become powerful creations of awakening or enlightenment or wealth consciousness because they have healed the underlying shadow work that they needed to do. So in every sense of the word shadow, there is some truth behind it. We identify it as swampy, and that's acceptable. We identify it as scary, and that's acceptable. We identify it as powerful, and that's acceptable. And we identify it as our unconscious thought, and that's acceptable. There's little different pieces to our shadow that truth lies behind each and every one of them. And perhaps you have a completely different view of what your shadow is, and perhaps the media has a completely different view of what that is, and all of those are totally acceptable. We don't have to specifically hone in on any one thing and make that one thing truth for us, because as we've learned so far in our mental wealth consciousness, we get to be divergent beings. We get to learn and grow in multiple ways. I'm going to just make sure, okay, we are still live, so beautiful. I don't know what's going on with Facebook. So, moving forward with that, I think the biggest thing that I hear, and this was literally just a conversation I was having, I think I briefly said it on our last live stream, with somebody saying that they were trying to switch their paradigm and they were doing some shadow work, and I asked her, are you enjoying this work? And she said, no, not at all, or no, not really. And this is this common exception or thing of acceptance to where this type of work is the brutal, hard, no fun work, but it's the necessary work to overcome and rise to your next level of consciousness. And you know, there's for me personally, there's two different things here. Number one, when I'm working with a client, when I'm working in a group, when I'm working in any way, shape, or form, I never bullshit those I'm working with and tell them that all of the work we are going to do is super duper easy and they're going to turn around and walk away a happy, joyous, and free person tomorrow. Because the reality of that is, although the work that we do is very simple at its core, it is not necessarily easy. You're going to have bad days. You're going to fall back into some of those same patterns, and you're going to have a hard time from time to time. You're going to have those days when you just are so low energy that you sit in bed and cry all day. The work we do isn't to end all of that suffering, but to transcend that suffering into a new way of living, being, and believing. And so, although I'll be the first person to admit to you, to my clients, and to myself that our work is sometimes tough. Sometimes our work is looking ourselves in the mirror and kicking ourselves in the ass. I can't tell you how many programs in the beginning were focused on that. Getting over your shit and kicking yourself in the ass. Because it is tough work and you have to do it if you want to, rise up. And so I'll be the first to tell you that part of your shadow work might be rigorous or brutal. But I also want to be the one to say that your shadow work doesn't have to end that way, and we truly get to pick the journey that we create when it comes to our shadow work. Our shadow work can be totally exhilaratingly fun. It can have so much creativity and inspiration put into it that we don't even feel like we're working. And in fact, I'd venture to say that if the work that you are doing on your personal development, on your mindset, is all this brutal writing, all this self-awareness, all this plaguing questioning, then you're doing it wrong. Because ultimately, on our journey to rise up and to create a state of mental wealth consciousness, we can't be living in that lacking or swampy consciousness, right? I mean, like, does that make sense? And we've kind of been societally trained to believe that we have to do the hard work to get ahead. But the reality is we've seen so many people do the hard work day in, day out for years on end and never get ahead. And we've seen so many people have lucky breaks and be able to rise to the levels that we desire to be at. And we've seen so many people do the hard work and it pay off. And so when it comes to our own personal journey, if we're doing all this hard work begrudgingly and it feels like shit, where in our belief of attraction does that actually equal a wealthy consciousness? It doesn't. So when we're working on our shadow, when we're beginning to heal these roots, we should be participating in aspects that allow us to heal and embrace our shadow in fun and creative manners that actually lift our spirits up. That's the true way to move from this brutal, tough work and actually move into embodying it all as you move forward. You don't want to do the brunt work to get to hopefully a space of highlight and happiness. We want to do the fun work so we continue to create and embody the highlight and happiness that we desire. So if you're stuck on your mindset work, on your healing your wounds, on your scars, on your this, on your shadow work, on that low level version of your self-work, I want you to begin to see the other possibility, the other side of you that could actually be enjoying and embracing the shit out of this. Whether it means simply shifting your 40 questions into an art project and diving into your creativity, or whether it means completely redoing your way of learning. One thing that I want to say when it comes to the shadow work is because your shadow work is part of your spirit, because your shadow is a part of your spirit, it craves this creativity inside of you. And so if your shadow healing or your shadow work isn't inspiring you creatively, you are not lifting that spirit up. You're just cycling through the same thing. Now, when we look at our shadow work as this unconscious or more psyche work, we're going to want to lean towards some of those more psychological aspects of, less creative avenues. But when it comes to taking it on our other direction and viewing this spirit, we need to be rising it through creative means, because that's how our spirit, that's how our soul becomes, that's how it makes, that's how it speaks to us. And so your shadow work shouldn't only be this brutal, painful journey, but it should also be this really exciting and inspirational journey that you take to self-discovery without shame shame or fear of what you're going to find, because it is within you, and your spirit is beautiful. Your spirit is pure. Your spirit is your highest self. And although, as I admitted earlier, that some of our shadow work may be identified as lower versions of ourselves, overall, your heart wants to speak to you to allow this rise up to fully happen. And so we have to begin to accept that even though the work that we are doing may be darker, it is a beautiful piece of us to bring us to this breakthrough. So I want to give you guys some creative methods that I did not come up with to kind of do a little bit of this work. And I want to say something really huge here. We come to our shadow work when we want something, right? When we want something in our lives that we are time and time again not getting, we go, it's time to do the shadow work. It's time to heal the childhood roots. It's time to lean into the dark to find the light. It's time to work hard, get nitty-gritty, and embrace something new. So this is usually our journey when it comes to, like, now we've done these things, now it's time to step in a little deeper and do something more. So that being said, I think we need to begin to shift the way that we view that which we don't want. I've been on this very beautiful journey recently, and it has really taught me some powerful truths about myself. And that is where I am or you are so attached to lack, where you find not just attached to it, as we spoke about in our motivation is shit video, but where you actually super duper enjoy it. So we're going to look at this lack as your shadow for just a moment in this example. You know, your light, your higher consciousness version sees yourself being wealthy and healthy and happy and wise. And this heightened consciousness portion of you can envision this and can see this, but no matter what steps you do, she's not actually there in you. So you take the time to look backwards, to look into your darkness, and to see what exactly is blocking her from coming fully to the picture of light and happiness, wisdom, health, wealth, and yada yada yada, right? And so that's our common modality that happens here, is we look back. But I want to ask you that when you're looking back at that base emotion of why am I not here why am I here when I desire to be here, I want you to go back to what you actually desire for a second. That healthy, wealthy, happy, and wise woman, versus what you currently have, a not so happy, not so healthy, not so wealthy woman. And I want you to find the pleasure in that shadow version of you. What is it that you absolutely love about your not so heightened consciousness? What is it that you absolutely love about that lower level version of yourself? Where do you find pleasure? Because the reality here is there is some attachment to that lower level version of ourselves. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in it. And a lot of it is this subconscious or this unconscious intentionality within it. But some of us may be more aware. But what is the pleasure that you actually find in that lower lack of a person? So to give you an example here, if you are desiring to be this wealthy woman, but you're going back to your dark and you're trying to figure out what it is, what money mindset block is stopping you from making this money, ask yourself, what do I find so pleasurable about being broke as fuck? One of the things that come to mind for me that is pleasurable about being broke is the fact that it allows you a responsibility and sense of control over your livelihood, over your life itself. You know, the rich person is able to spend money with ease, doesn't have to count every penny. And if you're a type A personality, living like that with total ease and frivolously isn't something that you've ever actually been attracted to, even though you really desire to have that type of money. What is attractive to you is to live very patterned and realistic and structured. And so one thing that you love about being broke is it allows you to have that responsibility and control factor that your type A personality desires. And so this theme is true in so many different aspects of your shadow, whether it's money, spirituality, physicality, trauma, pain, all of that stuff. Now, in no way, shape, or form am I saying that you have a responsibility towards your trauma itself. I'm not here to say that you are a victim living in a victim mentality. But I am here to push you towards this idea that perhaps, just maybe, your shadow is the truth behind you. And the reason why she's coming forward so much in your life is because you love the fucking shit out of her. And you actually desire to be her more than you desire to be the lighter version of you. Because she's comfortable, because she's safe, and because she doesn't have to try that hard because these patterns are already instilled. And maybe, just maybe, you want to stay there. And maybe, just maybe, in order to actually be her, the higher version of yourself, you have to consciously fall back in love with the lower version of yourself. Come to the awareness and stop denying the pleasure that you find in your shadow. Now, we just gave you an example of money, but this can be done in so many different ways. Women totally deny the kinky, sexy, raw, juicy version of ourselves. We deny it. We tell ourselves we don't like that, when in reality, there's that piece of us that all love it. We deny the painful, hurting, suffering version of ourselves and tell ourselves that we're strong and powerful and can rise above. And although that's totally true, there's a portion of us that truly loves the romantic, depressive version of ourselves. And so when we lean in just a tad and we begin to say, okay, yes, I do love this block. I do love this setback. I do love this shadow. We can begin to move these shadows away from being unconscious patterns, because an unconscious pattern only repeats itself when, unbeknownst to us, when it's unconscious. But when we begin to bring it to a conscious light, we begin to have the power to choose a new one. And so the work that we're doing here is so super duper spiritual, but it's just as much psychological. Because as we begin to lovingly embrace and find pleasure in the shadow, the spiritual side of this, we begin to combine the psychological side as we pull those unconscious programmings forward and bring them to their truth. And when they're brought to their truth, they no longer rule our lives because they're no longer dominating our day-to-day patterns. So when it comes to embracing your shadow, live a little. Allow yourself to fall in love with all of that lack within you. Allow yourself to mind map your own patterns of where all of your lack, mental, conscious-wise, is actually perfectly acceptable to you. And then as you bring it forward, as you undeniably accept it as the truth and existence in your life, play with it. Have some fun with it. Begin to enjoy the process of your shadow work so that as you rise up, you are evolving in the moment and not waiting for the miracle at the end of the rainbow. As we all know, that pot of gold is rarely there. But if we enjoy the ride, it doesn't matter. So, that is what I have for your shadow work. Again, this is one of my favorite topics. It's really something that I've related to since I was like 4. I've always really been interested in that grungier aspect. And what I learned about myself is that the older that I grew, the more I denied that because the less acceptable it was to society. And it wasn't just this societal grunge view, but it was all those things down below for me that I denied time and time and time again that created this disconnection from a gigantic spiritual piece of myself. So to sum up here, the ride to working through your shadow should be a fun one. It should be one that rises you up currently and not just at the end. It should be one that allows you to enjoy your day-to-day actions. And number 2, it's okay to identify with your shadow in a number of different ways. We don't have to have a specific definition for us to be able to do this work in a really spiritual and impactful and psychological way. And number 3, as you're moving forward, remember to accept exactly the lack that you have and find the pleasure in it. To end this, I really want to just ask you guys, are you truly disgusted by your lack? Or are you actually secretly kind of in love with that shadow self? So, that's all for this video. Again, guys, the Rise Up cart is open. We have our masterclass at a total steal. We have our master code course at a total steal for everybody here in this group. The cart closes before the end of the month, so you're going to want to get any questions in to me, as this will be the container that will incorporate so much good stuff to get you to that next level of playing field. And we have another video for you Wednesday, although of course I have no idea what it's about. I'll have to look back. So that's all I have for this one for you guys. I will see you guys Wednesday. Please comment your questions, your thoughts, and everything below. And we'll see you next time. Ta-ta!